Welcome to the Voices of Otolaryngology podcast series, where we spotlight diverse perspectives and insights within the field of otolaryngology. I'm your host, Rahul Shah. Let's jump into it. Welcome to the Voices of Otolaryngology. I'm so happy and lucky and blessed today to have my new friend, Dr. James Kearney. Dr. Kearney, thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much, Rahul. It's an honor to be here.
And I think you have a fleece on. I saw you pen there. Tell us a little bit about where you are, where you're affiliated, so we can get to know you.
Sure. So I am faculty at the University of Pennsylvania. I practice at the nation's oldest hospital, Pennsylvania Hospital, which is part of the Penn Health System. I've been with Penn for 30 years now, and I love it here. I am a comprehensive otolaryngologist, and I am also the vice chair of education for the department. I have a passion for education in addition to my passion for history.
And that's what we're going to be talking about today, how looking back to history can drive us forwards. I called you a new friend. Certainly I knew of you when I rotated there as a med student, but you've been very welcoming to me. Thank you. You gave me a tour of the nation's oldest hospital. Which hospital is that? And I bet you if our members reached out, you'd walk them around. You're so proud of that hospital. Could you tell us a little bit about the nation's oldest hospital?
Sure. So Pennsylvania Hospital is the nation's oldest hospital, founded in 1751 by Benjamin Franklin. So Benjamin Rush, the father of American medicine, was also one of our founders. It's a terrific place. The original hospital is still standing. The hospital is going to open itself for the 250th anniversary of the country. Starting in April, we actually have a museum in the hospital. So anybody who's coming to Philadelphia, I highly encourage you to come in and see Pennsylvania Hospital. We have the original surgical amphitheater, which is fascinating to see as surgeons. There's a large gallery where back in the day, you could pay your fee and come in and watch surgery happen. Things are a little different nowadays, but it's fascinating to see.
Two highlights when Dr. Kearney showed me around was in the amphitheater. We went all the way up to the top, and the view is amazing and the lighting is superb. You could certainly understand how it was great for surgical education. Can you tell them about my favorite part, where I think you're an intern there, you get your name forever memorialized, and some of the names there are pretty neat.
Yeah, so every intern who has trained at Pennsylvania Hospital has a brass plaque on a wall going all the way back to 1751. And it's a fascinating way of looking at the journey of different waves of immigration coming into the United States. You see the names change from all Anglo type names to you see the different waves of European immigration, and then it opens up to the whole world in the last 50 years or so. So it's just a great tribute to all those who have rotated here, and it's just a great visual to see how many different physicians we've trained over the years.
I've always loved the rich history of medicine, let alone surgery, and definitely otolaryngology. And Dr. Kearney, you've really amplified that for me in my first role. Can you explain how you serve the Academy as a volunteer leader, maybe for those members who don't know your capacity over the History and Archives Committee?
So I'm the chair of the History and Archives Committee, and our mission for the Academy is to make sure that we are doing our very best to preserve the history of our great society through publication and through encouraging research. We also are the archives portion of things. We want to make sure that the artifacts that are associated with our specialty are preserved and also available for the membership.
Yeah, you visited us here at the headquarters and spent considerable time on the 5th floor of 1650 Diagonal Road, which is our museum. Take a couple of minutes and talk about that experience, what you saw there, maybe some of the interesting stuff. I can remind you, we had Chevalier Jackson's desk, white gloves, his wallet. We had a lot of books. Please just reflect on anything and tell the story, Jim. Let people know what's up here. And you and I had so much fun looking through some of the stuff.
You know, I will say that I was always fascinated by the fact that we had these archives, and in my role as the chair of the committee, I thought it was really important to come and see. The item that is, I think, probably our crown jewel is Chevalier Jackson's desk. It's a beautiful desk in and of itself, but to actually be able to put your hand on the wood that this individual who is such a giant in our field actually worked at that desk, that was very moving to me. You and I took a photo there, and that's something that gives me joy to look back on that photo.
Jim, tell us about it. You used a word, but I want you to correct yourself. You said he's a giant of our field, but was he a giant?
His desk, I don't know if I could get my knees under it. He was a man of relatively short stature, but a giant in so many other ways. Really someone who is a phenomenal artist, first of all. So, someone who could illustrate his own medical work that he did, and somebody who also had that kind of tinkerer's aspect to him. He worked with the local silversmith in Philadelphia to create his own instruments. So he really invented bronchoesophagology in addition to being so proficient in it.
Then we found, help me, you said that he would have for his light source, or he would have a portable contraption. Tell me, remind me. And we have that in the academy where his residents would have to carry it around.
So we still have the very old battery cells that were used to power the light sources that were used. And they're incredibly bulky. When nowadays you just take a little battery operated light source, tuck it into your pocket, residents were literally lugging around, things were close to 100 pounds in weight with all the batteries in order to do this type of work. It's fascinating when you see the photos of Jackson. There is a designated head holder, and all that person did for the day was to hold the patient's head as Dr. Jackson did his endoscopies.
Wow. We've all pulled hook or held hook. I guess you would also hold head in that time. Any other displays that you remember? And I don't mean to test your memory at all. I love the women in otolaryngology section. I love the books that we have up here and some of the hands-on memorabilia. Anything else that stuck out to you? I don't mean to put you on the spot.
So the artwork that the Academy has is really quite impressive. There's a beautiful portrait of Pulitzer, and some of the drawings done by Jackson himself, a lot of them are chalk on black paper, and they're just aesthetically beautiful to behold.
Yeah. Where does the passion for history come from? I think you've had this for decades. Why?
I can't really tell you, Rahul. I remember being back in high school. I went to a Jesuit high school, St. Joe's Prep, of which I'm very proud.
Yes.
Vividly remember my freshman Jesuit high school history teacher telling me that those who are unaware of the past are doomed to, make the same mistakes going forward. So, when you look at the evolution of things, it's really interesting to see the things that failed, the things that didn't work. We only hear about these successes, but it's really interesting to see the failures along the way, and you realize why certain things died out and why other things succeeded. So I think it just helps to give you a sense of where we've been. Anytime new innovations come out, I'm always a bit circumspect, knowing that, when you look at the life cycle of these things, not everything is going to work. And you just want to be careful what you're applying to your patient.
One thing that's excited me, inspired me is you firmly believe, and when I toured Pennsylvania Hospital with you, you shared this belief. You like history to be living and touching. It shouldn't be in the fifth floor here. It shouldn't be hidden away. And we'll talk about Tuesday morning at the annual meeting where I attended an amazing session, the paper competition. But talk to me about the traveling museum and some ways that you are trying to get the history of our specialty out to our members.
Sure. So we have this terrific museum at our Academy headquarters, but I would estimate that probably less than 1% of all Academy members will actually walk through the doors and be able to experience that museum. So many of our members attend the annual meeting the idea, and this, you and I chatted about this, and you were the one who suggested the traveling museum, which I thought was a fabulous idea. We may have even used ChatGPT, or perhaps Claude gave us some suggestions in terms of ways of getting it out to the membership. But what we want to do is to take some of our treasures and bring them to the annual meeting so that people can look at them, and I'd love for them to be able to actually touch them as much as they can without, creating damage to the artifacts. But these are things that should not be just sitting in a room that no one gets to look at them. If we have these things, then we should make them available to our members, and these are part of our collective heritage.
Very well said. I was thrilled with the Chevalier Jackson Traveling Museum this year, and the location was intentionally right on the path. And I saw luminaries, I saw medical students, I saw international members congregating and discussing it. I'm sure you saw it as well. Wasn't that awesome? That's what we want.
It was, and we got a lot of very positive feedback. It brought people joy and pride in our specialty. And anytime you can bring those two things to people, it's a good day.
And you know how I think, Jim, I'm always going to ask you what's next. So that was Indianapolis. And I know you and your committee are thinking about the traveling museum for Los Angeles. I'm not going to hold you to it. Only about 15,000 people will hear what you're thinking. But what are you thinking? You and I had some really out there ideas, but what are you thinking for LA? And I can tell you some of our out there ideas.
Sure. So because of the location of the House Ear Group, which was so monumentally important in the development of the cochlear implant and elevating otology, we want to make an otologic focus for our traveling museum in Los Angeles. And we are reaching out to different groups around the country that have historical artifacts. So not just our own Academy artifacts, but if we can get items that are temporarily loaned to us from other places, we're going to do that. In addition to having a static display, we also would like to have docents who come and speak at scheduled times to help to bring this stuff to life. I know personally that if I go to a museum and I walk around, I have one experience, but if I go with a docent that actually gives me the insight as to these pieces that I'm looking at, it's far more valuable and much more enjoyable of an experience. So we're going to have some docents at scheduled times to give talks, and they'll just be right there by the booth. They're not going to be in a lecture room. They're going to be actually talking about the items on display. And, I think that once someone starts speaking, they'll probably draw a crowd of people that hadn't even thought about it. But, just like happens with a docent in a museum, there's the scheduled tour, and then people start to come and listen in addition to the scheduled tour.
Well, you can count me in, Coach. I'll be there to start the crowd gathering. What a wonderful idea. And some of those docents might be some of your committee members. You have wonderful committee members that are committed to advancing history and archives. Would you agree with that? A wonderful cadre of great committee members.
We do. We've all broken down into subcommittees. Everybody's active and engaged, and the smaller subcommittees are giving everyone a sense that they're bringing value to the committee. So in addition, for the docents, in addition to our committee members, we're also going to see if we can get some of the giants of our field that, may have been responsible for developing these devices. If we can actually get some of those individuals to come and speak at the display, that would be also one of our goals.
Well, let's definitely commit to making that happen. I was just going to interrupt you, but you almost took the thought from my mind. One of the highlights of the annual meeting for me was randomly bumping into Eugene Myers, and I just pulled him and got a recording. But more interesting was talking to him and the evolution that he has seen, not just in meetings, but in education. I'm sure you remember some of those great conversations with some of the icons in our field.
Yes, Dr. Myers is truly one of the giants of our field, and someone who, not just through his accomplishments, but also through philanthropy in promoting things. He has an endowed lectureship in our department. So each year we have, and it's named for his father, David Myers. So we have the David Myers lectureship each year. And tomorrow night, I'm going to the College of Physicians. There is a talk that's sponsored by Gene Myers on why doctors write. And a short film was made. We're going to have a film viewing and talk about how doctors express themselves in non-medical matters, to develop their humanity.
Wow. Every time I speak to you, I learn from you. So there's the lineage is 3 Doctors Myers, correct? David, Eugene, and Jeffrey in Texas.
At the beginning of the David Myers lecture, we always show this photo that has all 3 generations of Myers in the one photo. Yes, David Myers was a chairman of the Graduate Medical Hospital Department of Otolaryngology and also chair at Temple University. So yeah, there's a very strong lineage in the Myers family of bringing greatness to our field.
And they've transformed our international outreach and engagement, as you said, through endowments. I wonder, Dr. Kearney, if that short film is something you might even be able to air in the museum. I'll leave it to you to figure it out. I've probably gotten myself in trouble with our meetings team, but we want to get that out there. It's such a treasure trove.
Sure. Or if we don't air it in the museum, perhaps we just bring it to the attention of the membership through the bulletin and we put a link to it. I'm sure there will be something like a YouTube channel. So always want to bring the value to our membership through the bulletin. And this is something I think that will help all of our humanity.
I attended Tuesday morning the resident paper competition, if I'm using it the right way. Amazing. I was blown away by the residents. I'm sure you are every day. Incredibly intelligent, but how they took the adage from your Jesuit freshman teacher and what you believe in, they're looking backwards to guide us forward. Can you talk a little bit about the resident competition, how to get involved, maybe call out a highlight or a winner from this year? I remember them if you can, but please, Dr. Kearney.
Sure. So a lot of the credit for this competition goes to an Academy member, Dr. Bob Pettit. Bob is a neurotologist who practices out on the West Coast, was one of the people very involved in developing the cochlear implants up in San Francisco. Bob and his wife, Dory, very much enjoy coming to the annual meeting and being part of what used to be called the Historical Society. And so when Bob's wife passed away, he established a foundation in her name and funds an award for the winner of the resident paper competition through his foundation. So each year we send solicitations out to residents, and it's now also open to medical students to submit an abstract. There is a $5,000 prize for the winner, which is,
wait a minute, a resident's getting $5,000?
$5,000.
What does their mentor get, Jim? Can I mentor somebody and get a cut of that?
Undying gratitude.
Wow.
And medical students are allowed to participate as well. So we send solicitations out each year to the program directors and ask them to get the word out. We also use the residents and fellows section of ENT Connect to get the word out. So residents can submit. We are looking for original research, not just a regurgitation, but we are looking for people that are going and looking at original material to make sure that the sources are all valid, and looking for topics that are going to bring interest to the membership. So the competition's been going on for about 6 or 7 years now, and the caliber of the submissions is absolutely outstanding. So we had some phenomenal talks this year to the point that I believe that you're actually going to use a couple of those speakers to come and talk about innovation going forward.
Yeah. May I try to remember? One was on the development of the machetoscope, and another one that really stood out to me, and I think this one won. I hope they did. I think it was on otosclerosis and stapes, the evolution of the surgery. Am I right?
That is correct.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting to see the failures that occurred along the way, and then then there's the breakthrough, the aha moment that puts things forward. So I think that was the aspect of the talk that was really interesting to see, how you had to have certain things in place. You had to have microscopes in place. You needed to understand the physiology, and then you needed someone who was bold enough to actually proceed.
Yeah, I'm big into technology and what's around the corner. I think of quantum computing or cyber right now. The solutions that we have now could only exist in this environment. There's been many failures for decades before. Same with artificial intelligence, right, Jim? I mean, they've been looking at this since the 60s and 70s, but you needed computing power. You need the right ecosystem. So the failures from state piece surgery and the machinoscope created the right environment.
It's Malcolm Gladwell, wrote a whole book about, the way ideas spread, and how sometimes there are some key individuals that are the connectors and build the bridges, the influencers who drive things. So, sometimes it takes, you look at the history of transoral robotic surgery. So, resident goes out and learns the technique, comes back and shows it to somebody like Greg Weinstein at Penn, who is a master. He's got that systems engineering gene in him, and then you have someone like Bert O'Malley, who is someone who is just a fabulous communicator. And you put that together with the HPV epidemic, and all those things come together, and suddenly there's an truly revolutionary way of addressing oropharyngeal cancer.
Very, very well said. So you and I were excited by the presentations, and we have the ENT Innovation Connection, and we both were ideating, saying, if we want to move forward, we have to look backwards. So we were going to pick some of those from that resident research competition, as you said, Jim. So really, really appreciate that. And we'll do that next year again at the annual meeting. This is an annual. Dr. Pettit has endowed this.
Yes, and hopefully Bob will fund this ad infinitum. So
Yes.
it really is, the prize is certainly something that drives people's interest and gets a lot of submissions for us. And with the opening up things to medical students, we all know that our medical students are highly, highly productive. They are very motivated to do a lot of research to get into our great specialty. And we have individuals that have a little bit more time than residents who are also going to be putting time and effort into this. So it's going to yield great things for us documenting the history of our specialty.
Yeah, exactly. Very, very well said. Much gratitude to him, and that was a phenomenal session. I do look forward to it next year. I have two more questions for you. What's been your biggest historical find? Whether it's in otolaryngology, whether it's walking around a Pennsylvania hospital. You showed me some amazing stories and artwork, but what's been one? I mean, you mentioned Chevalier Jackson's desk, but you don't have to have found it, but what's been like the coolest thing for you in history? Mine, let me tell you mine so I can give you a little second to think about. I was rotating as a medical student at UPenn from Boston University, and there was a patient I saw with Dr. Gregory Weinstein, and this patient had a laryngectomy, the longest in history, and Chevalier Jackson had done it when the kid was a little boy. So I went to the library at UPenn, the archives, and found the chapter that Dr. Jackson had written about this patient, and then we saw him 70 years later. Amazing, amazing. To me, that changed my trajectory, just as the Jesuit professor changed yours. But what's been your coolest find, whether you've discussed it or not?
So I'm the chair of otolaryngology at Pennsylvania Hospital, and this department and division status goes all the way back to 1897. And the person who served from 1897 through 1930 was a guy named Francis Packard, who was also very interested in history, and he kept a diary. And the Pennsylvania Hospital archives have the diary. I've read his diary. It is fascinating. He goes on and on about his friends, like Templeton, whose descendant developed the heart-lung machine. Penrose, who, the Penrose drain that all of us use was one of his friends. A lot of the people whose names are applied to surgical instruments were people that he went to medical school with and hung out with. It's fascinating to watch as things evolve. Eventually, there's a telephone, and the boy from the hospital no longer has to run to get him when it's time to come to the hospital for an emergency. He now has a telephone that they can use to reach him. He kind of wanders through different specialties before he settles on otolaryngology. And it's interesting because he talks about the things he tried and didn't like, and then he finally decides on otolaryngology, and he really thrives. He develops otologic instruments. He's someone who's part of the American Laryngologic Association, somebody who was very actively engaged in our specialty and also in documenting the history of medicine in general.
Very cool. And that was before, I think, the ACGME put out their study on medical education, I believe, right? He trained in the era that was, I forgot what that study was, in the 40s or 50s, right? The landmark study that created
the Flexner reports.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Which really fundamentally changed things for the better in medicine. But up until then, it was a bit of a free-for-all in terms of, you just hung your shingle out and maybe declared yourself as a specialist. Maybe you went to Europe to get some training, but really very different times.
And how long have you been the chair at Pennsylvania Hospital?
I've been here at Pennsylvania Hospital as first the division chief and then the chair, going all the way back to 2004. My predecessor was a guy named Joe Atkins, who was third generation physician. His father was also an otolaryngologist through Penn. So Joe and his father were here for decades. Joe was the division chief for 30 years before me, and poor Joe just suddenly passed away in 2004, and I was thrust into the position, and I've been doing it ever since.
I'll give you a moment to think about it. People know I don't rehearse these podcasts. You don't even know what I'm going to ask you. I don't even know. So let's go back from Dr. Packard to Dr. Atkins. Do you think we could do that? Could you do that for us? So there's Dr. Kearney, then Dr. Atkins, then there's a gap, and then Dr. Packard. Do you know the gap? I don't know. Do you know who the prior chairs were?
I have tried very hard, but Packard was someone who documented everything, and then there's almost like a like there's this gap from 1930 until 1974. I've been able to find virtually nothing about who the leaders were during that era.
Well, you're the man for it. If you can't find it, we're never going to know. So it's always fascinating. So, oh, sorry, one more question. I could go on forever. What parallels do you see from Dr. Packard's writings to where we are now? Maybe just one or two where you're like, oh my God, I can't believe in 100 years we haven't evolved. Or wow, they have the same problems, maybe scope of practice or reform or payment or have and have nots, where you say, oh my gosh, it's the same 100 years.
So, there was virtually no regulation back then. That's the thing that's so striking. When he wants to try something, he just does it. You don't need an IRB. There's nothing is approved by an FDA. You can just go ahead and do things. And, it's a highly regulated environment that we're in right now. We're like the airlines, where very much safety focused, but there's a lot of regulatory burden that comes with us. That's the thing I find most striking. There's a show on Cinemax called The Nick, which I would highly recommend to surgeons. It's a 2-season series loosely based on Halstead, and you really see how surgeons are evolving and trying different techniques, but there's no regulation, and sometimes patients paid the cost of that. But it was an era where there weren't great alternatives, so maybe that was okay. But nowadays, our standards are so high that it's a blessing and a curse.
Yeah. I'll end you with one final question. maybe a call to action for us to be engaged. Again, so much gratitude for you for bringing me under the wing. I love history, but you've shown me in my role how we can partner together to amplify it for our members and for our future. So I ask you, for our 15,000 listeners, 15,000 members, what can we do, Jim? What can we do as an otolaryngologist to ensure the legacy of our specialties preserved? Whether I'm in a community setting, whether I'm in a major academic setting, give us some tangible things, Jim.
So I just went to a talk also at the College of Physicians of Philadelphia by a guy named Stephen Freed, who has written a book about Benjamin Rush. Now, Stephen Freed is a journalist. He's not somebody who's a trained historian, and he calls himself a citizen historian. So he is going and looking at original material and just using his brain and common sense, and has written a spectacular book about Benjamin Rush, very compelling speaker. But he encouraged those in the audience. He said, I have no formal training. I just had a passion and motivation. And he went and looked at original sources and really brought Benjamin Rush to life, through his book. And I would encourage the members of the Academy that are interested in history to go ahead and write about a topic that you're interested in. The Academy Bulletin is actively looking for pieces that are documenting the history of our specialty. It doesn't have to be long. So, 800 to 1,500 words is great. It doesn't take that long to produce that type of a document. Maybe 1 or 2 footnotes in there, some photographs. If you have something that you're passionate about in the history of our specialty, please feel free to send it to me, send it to the Academy Bulletin editor, John Trumbo. We're actively looking for solicitations from our members.
I did my residency and fellowship up in Boston, med school undergrad, huge historical city. And I spent about 18 months to 2 years in private practice settings, community hospitals, just throughout the rotations. And some of the greatest finds were in those hospitals, Jim. My God, I'd be riding the elevator up and they'd be one of the biggest VIPs in the world going there for groundbreaking technology, or prime ministers in community hospitals, innovation. You'll see and you'll look back and say, oh my gosh, 1950s, this is where this surgeon was. I don't know if you've ever felt that sometimes. So I think these stories are all around us. It doesn't have to be Philadelphia. It doesn't have to be Washington or Boston. It's in all of our communities, these wonderful legacies of otolaryngology.
Some of this is, just creating audio archives of individuals that you think are important to the history of our specialty. And it may not be someone who invented a device or a technique. It may be someone who's done something really important for a region. And, talking to that person who may be getting on in years, and let's write down the history or get it recorded going forward. So, even interviews with, historically important figures are something that would be, I'm sure, of interest to the Academy membership.
Well, I'm going to put you on the spot for a third time. Do you think we can remember what the Jesuit freshman teacher said? I still love that quote. I think I'm going to paraphrase it. If we don't learn from our mistakes, we can't go forward. Do you think you can get it right? What was it again? Something about we're doomed.
Yes. Those who disregard history are doomed to repeat it going forward.
Jim Kearney, thank you so much. That was perfect. Thank you so much for joining us on Voices of Otolaryngology, for your service to the Academy, camaraderie, and friendship. Thank you.
Thank you, Rahul, for your outstanding leadership.
We hope today's episode sparked some fresh ideas. If it resonated with you, please subscribe and share it with friends. Have thoughts or suggestions? Use the feedback form in the show notes. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to follow us on social media for highlights, behind-the-scenes content, and updates. Thanks for listening. See you next time.